Welcome there, students. I just had a chance to look at all of your outlines and all of your first early draft submissions of the compare and contrast paper, and I wanted to just offer just some blanket advice to everyone. As is the way, I often type a lot of the same things for a lot of different people because you're all at the same stage of the paper. Everybody's working on the intros. You're writing your first body paragraph, so you're trying to execute the body paragraph structures we practiced last week, stuff like that. But let me just give you some blanket advice that I feel will apply to a whole bunch of y'all. So just stick with me, and I'll try to make it really quick. Let me shut the doors. My wife was down the hall talking too loud. All right, so um, so here's some things that a lot of people need to work on. Establishing exigence in the introduction. Too many of you guys, either in the first or second sentence of the introduction, just said, and there's two things I'm going to compare and contrast. I mean, you didn't do it exactly that way. But last week, and I don't think I have a video that emphasizes this particular handout. And to tell you the truth, I forgot it even existed until I was working with some face-to-face group. But this bit right here, advice on introductions with compare and contrast, a lot of y'all could stand to review this in the event that you missed it. Here I talk about how introductions for this paper are somewhat tricky for some students because you have to establish exigence. In other words, you have to describe a situation in which this information would be needed or relevant. And sometimes if you went really random, it's going to be even harder. But that's just the way it is, and that's okay. You can do it. You just have to exercise a little more creativity than your neighbor, perhaps. But right here, I give you a point-blank play-by-play of how you ought to write your introduction. And typically, you don't define which subjects you're going to be contrasting until the middle of the intro. So if you did that in the first or second sentence, I'm suggesting that you go back and reconsider how you wrote your introduction. Try to do that establishing of exigence. And if you've forgotten what that is, I mention it here, but it was a week 2 thing when we talked about introductions. So also about introductions, your thesis statement needs to point blank say A and B differ in these ways, or A and B are similar yet different in these ways. Now look, also on this handout, I give you a bunch of templates for how to write a thesis statement for this particular paper, so check that out. Here are some pretty straightforward, basic ones, but as they go along, they get a little bit better. Now, perhaps if I'd actually written some thesis statements instead of throwing templates at you, that would stand as a pretty good model. But yeah, that would be a good idea. Anyway, just work on improving what you're doing with thesis and make sure you're probably going to use the word differences. Same thing with your topic sentences. Every topic sentence you write for every body paragraph ought to explicitly use the word differences and tell me which new difference the next new paragraph will be discussing. So some of y'all don't do that, or some of y'all kind of make me guess at what the next paragraph's main idea is. Some people, anyway, I've seen some papers too where I'm having a difficulty figuring out which particular body paragraph structure or style that you've elected to use. And I know I've said this elsewhere, but I think most of you should be using style 1 because it's the simplest and it's the most straightforward structure for a paper like this one. Remember, each paragraph in the style 1 would talk about A first and B second every single time. And I think that's the most straightforward way to do it. And I really want you to do that for most of your body paragraphs, if not all of them. The one exception might be if you had to do 1 with the 2 or 1 with the 3, but number 1 should be your go-to. Some of y'all are writing these really thin body paragraphs, and y'all, I think there might be a couple of reasons for that. I think one is maybe you're using an outline that AI threw at you. Don't do that. Or it could be that you've you've got so much criteria, in other words, so many little categories of differences, that in trying to use them all, it squeezes down the discussion you have about any particular thing. And so you're ending up with paragraphs that are like 100 words or less. You should dial that up so that your each body paragraph is somewhere around 125 to probably more than likely 150 words. Now, if you hold yourself to that 150 words standard, you might find it more difficult coming up with things to say, but what you're actually trying to come up with is the analysis. And that's important because you want to have something to say about the differences, not just report that there are differences. So in compare and contrast, that's one of the major things I find with student papers. They know how two things differ, but they don't go that extra mile to explain why those differences even matter. And that's what you're doing in your analysis. And remember, analysis is part 3. In the style 1, analysis was like right here and then right here. You tell me how they're different, and then you explain why those differences matter, or why those differences exist, or what's the effect of those differences. Those are 3 ways for you to approach the details and to say, okay, well, I said this thing is like this way, but why does that matter? Or what's the effect of that? And that's what you write, answering those questions. So lastly, if these partial papers were submitted today, I would say a third of them would get a failing grade because of lack of proper MLA documentation. So please make sure that the sources you put on your little works cited, that you reference them in the body of the paper with signal phrase and in-text citation. To that end, remember this guy, using sources and avoiding source abuses. On page 477, as you can see, of this particular thing, it says, in order to smoothly integrate source material, you have to have a signal phrase, which is this part, in this article, these authors argue, and then direct quote there, and then citation here. So you must have a signal phrase, and you must have a citation. Now, particularly in the instances if you're paraphrasing or summarizing, you have got to have this to show me where you're done reporting from your source. So make a special effort to look at this handout and to look at your MLA guidelines and make sure that you are giving a full accounting of all the times you used sources within the paper. I hope nobody used Google's AI function. Let me show you what that would look like, by the way. What's a good topic, y'all? Headaches and migraines. How about that? Okay. So let's just say you wanted to write a compare and contrast paper about just your run-of-the-mill headaches and migraines. And then you looked at Google's AI overview. This isn't exactly giving me what I want. Oftentimes I have found, let me just try it again. I'll just say differences. Yeah, this is what I like. So here's what some of y'all are going to do. You're going to search for differences, and you should, well, this is probably something for another video, but you shouldn't do this. You should take a more careful approach to research. But the casual student who doesn't know what this is and that they're using AI, they're going to say, oh, I just got all this from Google. But each one of these is a different link to a different site, different source. And so people are giving very weak accounting of the sources that they're using because Google's throwing this kind of ready-made paper at you already. So if you have done something like this, you need to slow yourself down and take a look at the various sources that they link to and make sure you're giving a faithful account of information and where it actually came from, which is not Google. Google's throwing a bunch of stuff at you, and you got to disentangle that stuff, or else you're being academically dishonest. So, and you don't want to end up in a trap like that. AI is going to steer so many people wrong in so many different ways, and so I probably need to have an AI unit built into this class. But there's already a lot to cover, and I want to do a lot of practice, and excuses. I got to get it in there sometime, but I'm not exactly prepared to do it now. And as soon as I can get it done, stuff starts changing. Well, those are the challenges of the job, my friend. All right, good luck finishing this thing up. If you have questions about your paper moving forward, I don't believe a partial draft is due this week. The final draft is due this week. So if I gave you some advice about something and you want further details about it, then you probably ought to just email me that question, maybe with a link to the paper and a very descriptive, precise question of what you want from me. But and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Good luck finishing this thing, and I will read y'all soon.